Oh, top of the Wednesday morning. Good morning. Oh man, don't fall over. It's Wednesday. It's day 3 of the Goal Getter Challenge. I am so excited that you are back for yet another day of this challenge. Come on. We're going to get into it today. You better be ready. We are going to deconstruct shame. Oh my goodness gracious. This is a heavy topic and something that every single one of us has to deal with. But if we can deal with it, there's a good chance that trying to understand better where shame comes from and why it exists, we will actually be able to achieve the things that we want in this year. Let us go. Let's go. I just want to say thank you to every single person who has been part of this challenge. Y'all have been amazing. The engagement has been fantastic. You sharing this content with people, I'm here for it. And I certainly appreciate it. Every single day, if you don't know what we're doing, diving into a little bit of this book, Get Out of Your Own Way. We are every day in community having a conversation about something that may in fact keep us from having the kind of year that we want. And the idea of shame and guilt, whoo, that is something that we all have to get a handle on, because those as anchors, those as things that will inevitably slow our progress into whatever we would like to try and achieve in 2021, it's so important for us to honestly have a conversation about it, deconstruct it, get a little bit of a better handle on it so that we can actually move forward in a way that sets us up for success. So, number one, shame is a crazy topic. I just want to acknowledge at the top of this conversation that the idea of having to confront the things that you feel shame for, it's hard work. But creating the kind of life that you'd hope for in 2021, it's hard work. So we're going to dive into and do some hard work. There's a reason why we had a conversation yesterday about this idea of having to have it all together, that we're following up with a conversation around guilt and shame, because they are connected. If you have not yet signed up, sign up for this challenge, completely free. If you have signed up, then you know that there already was a 20 or so minute coaching conversation that was dropped into your email. Watch it at your leisure. But I'm going to unpack some of it here today because I want us to make progress in this year. Every single day, I think you know this, we're going to pick ourselves a winner for a one-on-one coaching Zoom with yours truly. And the winner from yesterday is Heidi Fox. Congratulations, Heidi Fox. You and I are just now becoming very, very best friends. I will reach out to you once this challenge is done and set up time for us to have our coaching time together. So congratulations to Heidi. All right, so let's dive in. One of the questions that I have been asking over and over the course of this last year, specifically and importantly in the last 7-8 months of my life, is this question of how I feel about myself when I am by myself, right? And I want to challenge you to ask this question: how do you feel about yourself when you're by yourself? And the answer that I tend to come up with at the end of a day, when I feel the very best about myself, is when I have been able to create integrity between the person I would hope to be on that single day and how I actually showed up in a way that was consistent, congruent with that vision of who I'd hope to be. The idea being that, hey, I've cast this vision for how I would like this next year to unfold. And I know every single day that I have to do certain things to actually afford me a chance to take one step closer to that vision of who I'd like to become actually coming to pass. And in a world where I know I need to try and be this kind of person, when at the end of the day, I've only shown up as this kind of a person, the delta, the distance, the dissonance that exists between who I would have hoped to be and who I actually showed up as is where shame lives. Okay? My shame lives in not actually showing up in a way that would have had me feeling like I'd created integrity between who I'd hoped to be and how I showed up on that day. And what it begs a bit is understanding where the definition of how I should show up on the day came from. Okay? All of you, myself included, we have been trained, we have been indoctrinated by ways to be. We have been told this is what it means to be a good man or a woman. This is what it means to be a good Christian. This is what it means to be a good mother or father. This is what it means to be a good anything, right? My belief in who I'm supposed to be in some ways was formed. The seeds were planted 40 years ago, right? I happened to grow up inside of a very religious household. And so from a very early age, there were a list of things that you do if you want to get to heaven and a list of things you don't do unless you want to go to hell, right? So that kind of wiring, the way that I was indoctrinated to believe that there was a right and wrong way to be through the lens of my faith, informs a little bit of how I suggest that I need to be a certain thing on a certain day to be good. I grew up inside of a society that has gender roles assigned to what it means to be a good man, what it means, if you were a woman, to be a good woman. And so I have, for the entirety of my life, been told stories around what I have to do every single day to live into the definition that someone else has constructed of what it means for me to be good. And the implication of this is that if you have not questioned where these frames, these structures, these belief systems came from, and if they serve the vision of who you're hoping to become in 2021, you may in fact live in a perpetual state of feeling like you can't live up to something else's standard. Right? When I feel shame, usually it's because I am triggered by the memory of a way I was told I was supposed to be, and in not fully leaning into that version of their definition, I feel like I am not enough. And shame, at its most basic level, is this feeling that we are not enough, that we're not inherently good, that we are not capable in and of ourselves. And so the opportunity for us as we pursue this great year that sits in front of us is to really ask the question of what the definition of good is. What is it that we actually aspire to be? And is that definition something that is connected to our values, to our life, or is it something that's being put on us, right? I read this book not terribly long ago called The Four Agreements. I really recommend it. The conceit of the book is this idea that every single thing in our lives, from a beliefs perspective, are a set of agreements that we made or had made for us when we were very young. And as we were inside of these agreements, anytime when we deviated from those agreements, it produced a reaction. A lot of times, for me, and I'm going to guess for you as well, that reaction can be a feeling of shame, of inadequacy, of wondering if you have what it takes to do the work that you'd hope to, if you actually can unlock the calling that lives and sits inside of your heart. Just understanding that there is the idea of agreements, that again, either we've agreed to consciously, or that because of the way that society, because of the way our family of origin, because of the influence of our friends, or the kind of love that we crave from someone may dictate the way we ought to be, if we are not conscientious of where those agreements come from, we will find ourselves perpetually wondering if we can hold ourselves to a standard that frankly is not our own. I know this is a little bit deep, but it's important that you at least start by identifying where your definition of what it means to be a good woman, a good mother, a good wife, a good husband, a good worker, a good Christian, a good father come from? Because if you are playing off of someone else's playbook, the possibility of you feeling like you're enough is compromised. And in that compromised state, you are going to suffer from shame in a way that acts as an anchor that will hold you back from actually pursuing every single thing that's on your list of what you'd like to have happen in this coming year. In the book, this is the book, hello, I wrote this in the chapter that we're going through today. The lie was, I did something wrong, so I am something wrong. And in this chapter, I use these lines. I wrote these words. Making a mistake, right? Making a mistake is just a natural part of life. Imperfection is a reflection, again, of your humanity. And we had this conversation yesterday about how having it all together is not actually a thing that you can ever actually attain. It's just not real. So you have to find a way to reframe the mistakes that you've made as a reflection of your humanity and not an indictment on you not being good or worthy or enough in the first place. So I wrote this. The learning you can take from the missteps that didn't serve you or your relationships, those learnings will light the way for where you need to go. Learning from those times when you were wrong is what ultimately builds character. Listen to this line. We are the result of the life we've lived, but we only become a prisoner of our mistakes if we allow it. You get to write the story of how your flaws have made you stronger today. You get to decide how you'll use the narrative of what's happened to create what's happened next. Choosing to learn from your mistakes, ask for forgiveness, express contrition, go to therapy, and do the things you need to process these wrongs. Those are steps in the learning process that can take your experience from bad to good. But staying wrapped in an identity as someone who's wrong or who's broken or who's not the kind of guy or gal who deserves certain things because of their past, that is allowing those decisions to imprison you, letting a person you no longer are condemn you to a life that's less than what's available to you, right? You have made mistakes. Congratulations. So have I. I am human. So are you. And the mistakes that we made are a reflection of our humanity, not of our inherent goodness, worthiness, decency, or availability to whatever kind of life we are trying to move toward, right? And I can tell you, in trying to understand my shame, I've spent a lot of time sitting on the couch of a therapist trying to get to the bottom of what it is that is behind the feelings that I can connect to over the times in my life and even in real time as I am processing so many things that make me feel less, that make me feel inadequate or not enough. And I can tell you that I had to start by asking the question of what my greatest fear is. And I would challenge you, what is your greatest fear? Because often your shame and your fear are cousins. They live very close together. And the things that you are most afraid of are likely the things that you are also triggered into feeling shame around. My greatest fear is that if I were to show you who I am, who I actually am, not who the society that says what it means to be a great man needs to be, not what my parents may have said I needed to be, not what my friends might think. If I were to show you who I really am and how I really struggle, that I might be rejected in being myself. That's my greatest fear, right? My want for love, my want for not being rejected is my greatest fear, right? So the work that I have to do and continue doing every single day, and the work that I'm going to argue you have to do as well, is to fight to love myself enough to not need love from what society dictates being good is. To not need love from any relationship, any structure, any system that's defined what it means to be good, but to recognize and believe in the bones of my marrow that I am good, that I am worthy, that I am lovable, irrespective of how I am imperfect in this world. Because I'm imperfect. I am super imperfect. And the idea that I might be able to mask that in a way that affords me the thing that I don't want, the idea that it could afford me the thing that I want more than anything, to be seen as myself and loved as me, that it might require me to manufacture some version of myself that is inauthentic to who I actually am, does not actually produce love. It does not actually create the intimacy that really knowing me would actually afford me. And so I've had to really understand, man, can I love myself? Can I create unconditional love for myself, irrespective of the mistakes that I've made, irrespective of the imperfection that might exist in my life? Because if I can, then they, right? The societal construct, the definition of what it means to be good is determined by religion, what my parents think or my friends think or what any of you might think, does not play a role at all in the way I feel about myself at the end of a day when I'm by myself, right? I still want to try and create that integrity. I still want every single day to define how I'd hope to show up for myself and my family and do everything I can to try and create that integrity, because that's when I feel great. But on the days I don't, I want to be able to give myself grace in that dissonance that might exist that doesn't allow shame to hold me down. I want to be able to give myself grace because I love myself and appreciate in my humanity that I'm going to make mistakes along the way, because that's what humans do. I don't know if you've seen the foremost expert on shame, the greatest human on the planet when it comes to shame, is Brene Brown. And she has this fantastic TED Talk that is like 20 minutes long. If you do anything for the rest of the day, I encourage you to watch this TED Talk because it's so good. But she talks in this TED Talk about the difference between guilt and shame, which is such an important distinction to make, right? Shame is a focus on self, right? Guilt is a focus on behavior, right? So if shame is I am bad, guilt is I did something bad, right? And being able to see the difference between doing something bad and needing to, through guilt, identify how you could have done something better, that's fantastic. But shame is I did something bad and I am bad. You believe that you are inherently not good, right? The idea is that, like, if you were to hurt, she uses this example in the TED Talk, right? If you were able to hurt somebody's feelings, there's a difference between saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, which is guilt, and I'm sorry, I am a mistake, which is shame, right? I am a mistake is the idea of shame. And shame, at the end of the day, it's really driven by these two big things. Two things. You're not good enough, and who do you think you are? You're not good enough, and who do you think you are? Those are the things that drive shame. And so when our insecurities are played upon, it's the trigger of not believing that we are inherently good enough, or that question, the imposter syndrome of who do you think you are? Having these dreams. Who do you think you are? Deviating from what society says a good man or good woman does. And what's interesting, just in that conversation around men versus women, she makes a big point that shame really shows up differently by gender, right? Like the feelings of shame actually feel the same as much to a man as it does to a woman. But the poison specific to women is all about the space that you as a woman have to live inside of that is this unachievable standard to be all things for all people, right? You have to be an amazing mom and an amazing wife, take care of the house, go hustle and have a career. You have to be all things to all women. And if you can't, which you can't, then you should feel like you're not enough. For men, it's a completely different thing, right? For men, it's do not be perceived to be weak. And so a lot of the work that I've had to do is just confronting that I actually will become free from shame when I can get over the worry that my vulnerability will be a signal of weakness rather than a symbol of strength, right? I had this opportunity in the midst of processing divorce. And I used this example when I was in the coaching that is in your inbox. I listened to this sermon from a pastor named Stephen Furtick. And he was talking about this idea of a secondary storm, right? Like that oftentimes there's a storm that is presented in our life, and the storm itself creates headwinds. The storm itself is hard for us to have to deal with, but oftentimes the storm that is the harder thing for us to have to deal with is the secondary storm that we create in reaction to the storm, right? The way that we allow these insecurities or the shame experience actually produce behaviors that don't serve us, that undermine who we'd hope to be, that keep us from actually maintaining the progress that we'd like, right? So like the idea of, hey, you've had some bad news, you're dealing with a hard thing, and you decide to reach for a coping mechanism. In my example, I used alcohol, right? Alcohol for me has been a source of shame in my lifetime because of the way that I have used it as a coping mechanism. And the coping mechanism of drinking does not actually satisfy the thing that I'm hoping for, which is to make my problems go away. It creates a secondary storm that makes whatever problem I'm dealing with worse. And the same thing is true. You have some shame around how much you work. The people who have shame around how much they work tend to express relieving that shame by working even more. The people who struggle with shame around eating handle the shame that they have around eating by binge eating after a certain hour in a way that produces additional shame, a secondary storm. And it becomes this spiral that is so hard to get out from under because our shame reaction is something that inherently creates more shame. So we have to do the work to try and understand why we have the kind of reactions that we do and how to dismantle shame when it presents itself so that we don't unnecessarily create a secondary storm, because all shame is a secondary storm that makes the problem that you're going through inevitably, unbelievably more difficult to get through. So in the email that you got, you may have seen this. I'm going to just hit the tops of the trees, right? The thing I think you have to appreciate, especially as we try and separate the idea of being guilty or having shame, right? You can be guilty and good, right? That was the first point, that doing something wrong doesn't make you wrong at your core, that you, as a human being, are inevitably going to do things that make you feel guilty, and guilt in and of itself can be a positive emotional experience. It might direct you into understanding how you could actually make some progress in addressing the thing that you have some guilt for. But shame is something that doesn't necessarily have positive attribution in your life, and dealing with it is important. So one of the things I put in the email was something I found in a book called When I Say No, I Feel Guilty. It's by a person named Manuel Smith. And in this book, Manuel Smith suggests that one of the things that you have to do to try and combat shame is truly this idea of creating love for yourself, unconditional love for yourself. And part of the way that he created this opportunity for love for himself was by identifying a bill of rights, as it were. The things that he believed himself to be allowed in his life. And the challenge I want to throw out to you, though it's not the challenge of the day, is take a look inside the email at the way that he's tried to frame the rights that he has deserved, so that you might give yourself permission when you find yourself challenged, when you find yourself in the storm, to not have a shame response, but to see that this is something that you are fully and totally entitled to, and that it is completely okay because of it being a sign of your humanity. Some of the things that he writes in his Bill of Rights: you have the right to change your mind. You have the right to make mistakes and be responsible for them. You have the right to say, I don't know. You have the right to be illogical in decision making. You have the right to say, I don't understand, right? He's made this list of things that he has a right to, that in confirming it on an every single day basis reminds him of his right to be human. And in that right to be human, offers the opportunity for unconditionally loving himself inside of the imperfection, so that in the imperfection and the humanity, he's freer from shame. Okay, so that's the first point. The first point is you can be guilty and good. Guilt is not in and of itself a bad thing, but when it comes to shame, find a way to create a list of rights that you are entitled to, so that in that entitlement, you can be free from judging yourself against the standards that other people may have put on you, the agreements that other people, other structures, other things in your history may have put on you that aren't necessarily serving you or for you. The second thing is the idea that guilt or shame can be teachers, right? I read this book called Healing the Shame That Binds You. It's by a guy named John Bradshaw. Old book, good book, talking about just all of the things that are inside of the conversation around guilt and shame. And one of the things that he points out is that shame, and I would argue maybe more so guilt, is something that can act as a signal, as something that might, in the same way that your car has an alert letting you know that, hey, you need to get some oil, you are low on gas, that when you make a mistake and you experience the feeling of guilt, it's just affording you information that if you were to spend a little bit of time, lean into it, that you might be able to create a solution that alleviates you from where you're currently experiencing this pain, right? So if you can see guilt instead of this negative thing that is coming at you, as instead this opportunity for you to identify areas in your life where you can do a little bit of work, build a little bit of a better plan, have a new set of habits or routines, that will fundamentally change the way that you see it and have a relationship with it. It's very much like, I talked about Untethered Soul yesterday and the way, or maybe the day before, and the way that, my anxiety as a character in my life, it shows up and is playing a role that it believes is there to actually help me. And so the hope in an emotion about it, or letting guilt tip into shame, could you instead invite guilt into a conversation where you are the observer of that guilt, not guilty? And as an observer asks, why are you here? For what reason have you presented yourself? And is there an opportunity for you, having presented yourself, that I might be able to learn something that in applying that learning would afford me a smoother sail in the road ahead? And the last piece is just this idea that mistakes are universal, right? It's why we had the conversation yesterday about this idea that having it all together is an impossibility, right? The thing that shame needs is secrecy, right? Shame thrives inside of these environments where you feel alone. And the more that you can normalize that actually having the experience of humanity is normal, and that you making mistakes is something that makes you human like every other person on the planet, it brings light into this space in a way that actually does what shame cannot afford. It brings light into it. It brings the opportunity for you to connect in a way that makes you feel less alone. And then feeling that sense of community has you appreciating that this is normal, that the things that you're processing and experiencing are normal, that the people you aspire to be like, they also have gone through and experienced mistakes in their life. Those that learn from them and can, in learning, pivot into some different new way of being, they're the ones that grow. They're not going to stay connected to, stuck, anchored by the way that the things that they may have done that don't serve them are an indictment necessarily on them. So as it comes to how in the world do you deal with trying to get rid of shame, back to Brene Brown, the master in this, she suggests that there are 4 things that you have to do on trying to get rid of these shameful emotions. The first thing you have to do really is just identifying what the emotions are, right? These are these self-defeating thoughts, but they are treatable. They are things that you can actually unpack and deconstruct if you're willing to do the work. Part of the hard part of doing the work around shame is that no one wants to admit that they are struggling. No one wants to actually bring their shame into the light because their shame is something that they don't necessarily want to have a public conversation about. So the first thing you got to do, recognize the signs of shame, understanding what your triggers are around shame. The second thing, critical awareness of shame, including its cultural and interpersonal function, right? This is the where did this definition of what good come from, and does that definition of good serve me in this day, in this year? Third thing, reaching out to others and sharing your story, right? Sharing your story, because shame cannot live inside of the light. It only thrives inside of the dark. And then the fourth thing, giving a voice to your feelings of shame because of how much shame derives its power from secrecy. Which brings us to today's challenge. Oh my goodness, that's a lot of yell talking. The challenge that I'm offering that every one of us try and do today is to share a recent mistake that you made with someone else, someone that you're close to, and how that mistake made you feel, right? If you're able to bring the thing that you are struggling with, that in secrecy is allowing that shame to live, thrive, and grow, you will become free from that shame the second you actually share the thing that you're struggling with. And it's hard. Guess what? It's hard to do. It is a hard thing to say, yep, I'm going to own the thing that I am working through. I'm going to talk honestly about the thing I'm struggling with. But when you can do it, it takes the power of shame away. All right. That was day 3. Goodness gracious. I'm getting sweaty up in here. I'm so excited about talking to y'all. All right. If you are getting anything out of this challenge, I'm going to ask you once again, please share it with your crew. Share it with your community. Let somebody know how you are taking whatever you are away from this and encourage them to join this challenge. It is, after all, completely free. We're going to have another conversation tomorrow. We're going to pick another winner tomorrow. The winner of the one-on-one coaching with me is going to be someone who shares the learning that they took away from today, something that they put up on Instagram. If you share something about this challenge, I'm going to put you in the mix to be coached by me one-on-one in Zoom. I cannot wait to see y'all tomorrow. Between now and then, I hope you have a fantastic Wednesday.